Skywalker 5. Emperor Palpatine returns, and you love to see it.
So hey, do you remember that single glorious moment back in 2019 when we got the first teaser for The Rise of Skywalker? We saw Rey do the cool backflip in the desert, and then we heard Emperor Palpatine laughing from the darkness somewhere. Ah, it was great, and among the nerds there was much rejoicing. And then the whining began.
I don't get it. How did Palpatine's
This wasn't set up properly in the previous films.
What about Colin Trevorrow's duel of sacrifice? Bad guy is Torvald.
Kylo Ren should be the big bad of the whole franchise.
Running out of ideas around Luke would have
the Emperor
who died on the second Death
not
Star
even
was just
trying.
a clone
Oh
or
my
something.
God,
They
they
had
had
related
related
to
to
Ryan.
Why did they give him the
Snoke
first
for
name
some reason?
Sheev?
This doesn't match up with my
This
nullifies the
with the more
original bad guy.
I'm not happy.
Yes, the choice to bring Emperor Palpatine back for the third movie was seen both as bold and shocking, but also safe and predictable. I mean, has there ever been a successful movie trilogy that has a villain appear in the third movie without being set up or referenced in the first two films? Has anyone ever done that? Yeah, I'm looking at you, Walter Donovan and Elsa Schneider. Where were you guys when they were raiding the Lost Ark? Anywho, the purpose of this video is to explain why I'm glad they brought back Emperor Palpatine for The Rise of Skywalker, and why I think he was the best choice. Let's get started.
It was Palpatine all along.
So why bring back Emperor Palpatine? Is this just fan service? Are they out of ideas? Look, it would have been the easiest thing in the world for J.J. Abrams to come up with a brand new threat. You could have had Darth Omnicron, who controls a legion of droids with his midichlorians or something. But the Skywalker saga, it's one long story, not three separate ones. This trilogy is kind of a new beginning, but it's actually more of an ending. The ending of the Skywalker saga, so it would be kind of weird if it involved some new threat that no one had ever heard of before. And some people wanted that. They wanted this new story where Luke, Han, and Leia, where they just left the Emperor in their rearview mirror, had a fresh start, and moved on to even more awesome space battles. But if you ask me, the time for that story to be made was the mid-90s, and not now. Now is the time to wrap things up. I mean, like, look at all this. J.J. Abrams didn't specifically know about all of this when he started making The Force Awakens, but he probably had a good idea that a whole new era of Star Wars was about to start. So why not take this chance to say goodbye to the old legends and play all the old hits while you still have the chance? Now that the dust has settled, just take a step back and think about all 9 movies as a whole. Think about watching them in order. You have the first chapter where this young hero goes on a quest, and at the end there's the fall of this evil emperor that we know almost nothing about. Then there's the middle chapter where we flash back to the past and we see how things came to be and how the evil emperor rose to power in the first place. But it ends on a tragic note where the heroes fail and the emperor succeeds. Then, at last, we flash forward to the future, where the world isn't yet set to rights because the villain is still out there. He's old and decaying, but preparing for one last blast of evil. But he's stopped by the younger generation of heroes who are helped out by the previous generation of heroes. It's one story. I mean, okay, 9 movies used to seem like a lot, but that's like, what, 1.5 phases of the MCU? 9 movies is not that much anymore. It's 19 hours and 36 minutes. That's the equivalent to 2 seasons of prestige television. So there's no need to get antsy and whine about when the new villains are going to come along. Have some patience. Let them finish the Emperor's story first. And it's done. It's done now. Was that really too much to ask? Look, Ian McDiarmid is 76 years old. He's not going to be around forever. Do the Emperor now while it's still possible, and then do Darth Omnicron later on, okay?
Palpatine is like a Nazi or something.
This is the main reason why Palpatine's return just feels right to me. Each of the Star Wars trilogies is based on something real, something from American history. Something real, or at least mostly real. The original trilogy was based on the Vietnam era. That's been well documented. An era where the government had become oppressive, and the good guys had to rebel against it. Palpatine was based on Richard Nixon, the Ewoks were the Viet Cong. We all know about this. The prequel trilogy was initially based on the fall of the Roman Republic, but also on the Iraq War era that was happening just as Lucas was making the movies. It's based on history, but also an alternate history. It's a warning to America about how a dictator might arise here and overthrow democracy, and that he'd use endless overseas wars and the ongoing threat of terrorism to do it. The Clone Wars cartoon? It's very heavily influenced by World War II. There's a reason why Admiral Yularen had that rockin' mustache and that very vintage-sounding radio voice.
Outer Rim under siege. Separatist forces have launched a major offensive.
The Clone Wars is World War II. So what about the sequel trilogy? Once you've used World War II, Vietnam, and the Iraq War as your inspirations, what else do you have? There haven't been really many other wars since then. To me, it seems pretty obvious that the sequel trilogy, it was based in part on a scenario from the world of speculative history. Conspiracy theory, you might call it. It's based on this long-standing myth that we once had, that after World War II, the Nazis fled Germany after their defeat, and they rebuilt in some place far away, like South America, Argentina, where they trained a whole new generation of brainwashed soldiers from a young age, and they built a newer, purer Reich to replace the old one. Now, if you're younger, you may not be familiar with this idea. It's long been a staple of late-night radio, and it's popped up in popular culture from time to time over the last half of the 20th century. The Nazis were the worst enemies that America ever had, and since they're so bad, can they really be gone? What if they return? You can find tons of examples of this in pop culture. There's The Boys from Brazil, where they tried to recreate Hitler by cloning his DNA, and then exposing his clones to a similar childhood, raising him just like Hitler was raised. There was this episode of The Twilight Zone starring Dennis Hopper. In it, the ghost of Hitler, who was lurking in the shadows the whole time, was secretly influencing a younger generation of hateful assholes to become very Nazi-like. Hell, there was that old 8-bit Nintendo game, Bionic Commando. The bad guys in that video game were this new generation of Nazis who were trying to clone someone called Master D, and at the end you find out that Master D is actually Hitler. It led to one of the most unbelievably badass moments in early video game history, because first you see Hitler says a swear word, and then his head blows up with a bunch of blood and stuff. Back in 1989, that was some unbelievable shit. Like, we couldn't even believe they got away with it. Hitler said damn? How can you say damn in a video game? That's, holy shit, that's mind-blowing. You know, I bet that J.J. Abrams played Bionic Commando back in the 80s. I mean, almost all of us did. It was an incredible game. And then there's Hydra in the Marvel Universe. The MCU, it explores this other wrinkle of the Nazi theory, where the Nazis survive, but instead of rebuilding on a faraway continent, they infiltrate America from the shadows and slowly take us over. There very well could have been a version of The Winter Soldier where Hydra clones the Red Skull, and there could have been a version of the Star Wars movies where the First Order overthrows the New Republic from within through secrecy and infiltration. Instead, it was the other way around. But either way, it's all about that fear that the Nazis would get us somehow if we let our guard down. So why did we have that fear? Why did we have this fear that the Nazis would return someday? You see, World War II, it brought out the best in America. The greatest generation fought the Nazis and won, and it was the greatest victory we ever had. But in the decades after the war, the people who fought it, they looked around at what was happening in America, and some of them thought that all this peace and prosperity, it was leading Americans to become lazy and decadent. We built ourselves a fool's paradise full of young baby boomers, and somewhere out there, our enemies were raising a new generation with iron discipline and complete dedication to their cause, and that they would find a way to come back and defeat us somehow. I mean, I once heard that right-wing radio guy, Michael Savage, he went off on this insane rant. It was something like this.
Over here in America, all of our weak, fat children are too busy trying to invent new ways to become homosexuals. Meanwhile, over in China, they're training their kids 24 hours a day. They're having them run through the sewers, living off rats and 3 grains of rice a day. That's why the Chinese are gonna bury us. I can't take it anymore.
A bit hyperbolic, but, you know, it's the same fear, that America would be defeated by our victory. But anyway, J.J. Abrams, he took this old dusty myth of the Nazis returning, and he kind of used it as the backbone of this new trilogy. He also updated it and made it feel more current by having it reflect our modern reality, with this new coalition of diverse heroes fighting against an angry white shitlord. You see this guy, General Pride? He's one of the original Nazis. When Palpatine returns, he's not surprised at all because he knew that this was always the plan. He sneers at Kylo Ren because Kylo Ren is just a wannabe Nazi on 4chan. But this guy, he's one of the real Nazis who follows the real Führer, Palpatine. Palpatine is a lot like Hitler. I mean, he's not just Hitler. He's Hitler, Richard Nixon, Dick Cheney, Chairman Mao, Emperor Augustus. But these guys, they are definitely Nazis. Both Hux and Captain Phasma are based on some old jingoistic stereotypes that America had about our overseas enemies.
You see, here in the good old USA, men are courageous and strong, and our women are virtuous and compassionate. Not like across the pond in Nazi land, where the men are pitiful specimens, physical cowards, and sniveling bureaucrats, often overmatched by their women, cold, heartless, gargantuan things they are, lacking any trace of traditional femininity or womanly aspect.
And did you ever see the Star Wars Resistance cartoon? If you did, then you remember a blonde-haired Nazi guy and this big German-looking lady who trained them. The First Order are Nazis. The problem with the Nazis is that they're always kind of there, even today. They're just kind of taking a new form. Oh.
Duh, but doesn't Palpatine returning nullify the original trilogy?
That's the weirdest thing I keep hearing, is that the sequel trilogy somehow invalidates the first one. That the Battle of Endor with the Ewoks should have brought peace to the galaxy forever or something? Huh? First off, in the old expanded universe continuity, the war just continued like a year later with Grand Admiral Thrawn, and the Emperor ended up returning numerous times. None of these nerds complained back then that this nullified the original trilogy, so why does it now? It doesn't. Back in 7th grade, when my friend told me that there was this book out there called Heir to the Empire that picks up the story a year later and that the Star Wars were still going on with some smart blue guy named Thrawn bringing the Empire back from defeat, I didn't angrily scream that this invalidated the ending of Return of the Jedi. I said, oh hell yes, more Star Wars! The story goes on? That's a good thing.
Duh, but what about Vader's great sacrifice?
Look, as a kid, you think that Darth Vader was some kind of super cool guy who wore a mask and did badass shit. He just loves being Darth Vader, doesn't he? But, as an adult, you should realize by now that Vader was kind of a wreck. He was a ruined man full of sadness and regret. Killing the Emperor, who had manipulated him from the start and ruined his entire life, it was literally the least he could do at that point. He saved his son, and he saved his own soul. The idea that Darth Vader didn't get all that he deserved out of this bargain is kind of ludicrous. Oh no, poor Vader! He gave it all up to defeat the Emperor. He gave up all those miserable days being malformed and dismembered in a Bacta tank, where he probably relives his past mistakes and is completely consumed by sadness and rage. And he can't share it with another living soul because he's just part of this military organization of assholes that he really doesn't even like and feels contempt for. Oh no, what a tragedy that he had to give that all up. Look, Darth Vader did what he did for selfish reasons. He wanted to save his son more than he wanted to continue being the Emperor's lapdog. He's not Space Jesus doing selfless things with no thought for other people. He did one good thing at the very end of his life, and the idea that that should be enough to bring peace to the galaxy forever? No. Why would you even think that?
Duh, but what about our heroes' great sacrifices? They sacrificed everything to win the war.
Okay, look, I'm just gonna say it. Luke, Han, and Leia, they got off easy. I'm not saying that they didn't work hard. I'm not saying that they're not great characters. They are. But in the grand scheme of things, they ended up getting almost exactly what they wanted. Luke got to meet his father, have adventures, see the galaxy, and become a Jedi. Leia got to see the defeat of the Empire and the rebirth of the Republic. Han Solo found something worth fighting for, and he met the love of his life. This original trio of heroes, they all decided to band together to fight the Empire, and after a couple of years, they won! They did it while suffering some setbacks, but they all lived, and they were mostly whole afterwards. That's not that horrible. They didn't really sacrifice that much. Luke left the farm life that he didn't really want. Han left the lone smuggling life that he didn't really want. And Leia left the life of being a compliant Imperial subject that she didn't really want in the first place. They don't really suffer all that much. None of them even died. All of their suffering and sacrifice comes later in the sequel trilogy, after they get old. The original ending of The Return of the Jedi was much darker. Han was going to die on Endor, Luke was going to vanish into the wilderness like Paul Atreides because he was permanently scarred like Frodo Baggins, and Leia was going to carry the burden of ruling alone without her brother or her true love by her side. You see, that would have been a heavy toll to pay. But instead, what do we get? Ewok party. I mean, look at them. They're happy. They're partying with friends, completely victorious. This is not a picture of people who have gone through so much pain and hardship that they deserve nothing but smooth sailing from here on out. I mean, Luke Skywalker lost his hand and immediately got a cool robot hand, and Han Solo got frozen in carbonite. Kind of a drag. He couldn't poop for like 3 days. Princess Leia, well, she lost her entire home planet, although they didn't really seem to mention that much for some reason. Look, I wouldn't change anything about the end of Return of the Jedi. The happy ending, that was a good idea. All I'm saying is that the Yub-Nub party on Endor, it's a temporary reprieve after the rebellion wins a major victory. And in no iteration of Star Wars is it a happy ending where everything is solved forever. If you think the story should just stop here and everything is peaceful forever, that's just horrible. Why would you want that?
I mean, come on, enough of this talk, people. You know, back in 1977, most movies didn't get sequels. When people saw the first movie and the Death Star blowed up at the end, most people thought that's it, that's the end. The bad guys lost and the good guys won forever. When the Empire struck back a few years later, did that invalidate the first Star Wars movie? What about old Ben Kenobi and the guys who died in Red Squadron? The Empire's still around, so their sacrifices meant nothing. Yeah, if you said that, you would have sounded super dumb. The way you do now. Duh, but there were other options for the main villain, so why'd they pick Palpatine?
Yes, there were other options, so let's take a look at each one.
Kylo Ren.
A lot of people thought that Kylo Ren should have been the big bad of the whole story. In the script for Duel of the Fates, his face gets scarred and he inherits this weird Sith power and he becomes super powerful and evil. But I don't think that would have been right, and it's not what was telegraphed from the first movie. I once had this teacher, and he told me that when he was a student, when the first Star Wars movie was in the theaters and all the kids were going crazy for it, his teacher came into class one day and he said, "Hey guys, you know that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father, right? Darth Vader, Dark Father? I mean, that's how these stories work. That's the myth." And all the kids were like, "What? No way, you don't know that, no." But this teacher, whoever he was, he probably figured that out even before George Lucas figured that out, because he was very familiar with myths. And looking back at The Force Awakens, I feel kind of dumb, because I didn't really see what was going on with Rey and Kylo Ren, even though it seems so obvious now. I mean, remember what happens. Kylo Ren meets Rey, overpowers her, and carries her off like a twisted version of a groom carrying a bride over the threshold. He takes her to his chamber where he unmasks himself and then tries to penetrate her mind, but she fights back and proves to be his equal, and then she gives him a lasting scar, a scar that he tries to heal, although nothing can heal it, except her love. All of that is the coded language of romance. It's enemies to lovers, not just enemies to enemies. And then in the next film, their relationship deepens. She sees him without a shirt on, and they have their finger-touchy moment. But my point is, there is nothing in the first two films that points to Kylo Ren ending the trilogy as a mad villain, because that's how he starts. If you start the trilogy as an irredeemably evil bastard, then that's not how you're going to end up, because then there's no arc. You're just... Kylo Ren being super evil would just be the same as how he started. That wouldn't make sense.
Supreme Leader Snoke.
Some people think that Snoke should have been the true villain and not just a Palpa puppet. Again, I feel kind of stupid for not realizing from the first movie that that wasn't the case. If Supreme Leader Snoke was ever supposed to be the real villain of this trilogy, they would have given him some kind of backstory in the first movie. It could have been something simple, like he was many thousands of years old and Palpatine was his servant or whatever. Or he came from outside the galaxy and he decided to invade after Palpatine was gone. But they never give you any of that. They never give you anything. He's just this big cipher that represents nothing. He's a big illusion, a big hologram. He's just this surface that's designed to impress and intimidate, but there's no story behind him. You can look back at The Force Awakens and tell that Snoke is not really the villain because he has no connection whatsoever to the heroes. Rey barely knows that he exists. And Han Solo and Leia, they're not vowing revenge on Snoke for corrupting their son. The only main character that has any relationship to Snoke is Kylo Ren. Whatever else Snoke might have been, he was always secondary.
Tor Valum.
In that script for Duel of the Fates, the ultimate baddie was some ancient Sith monster named Tor Valum. Ancient guy living on some faraway planet who was super evil and he had trained Sith forever. But then again, if you were going to go with that as your bad guy, you'd just have that be Snoke. Again, this is the ending of a story. There's no need to invent some super evil villain out of nowhere when you already have one. Palpatine. Palpatine was the right choice.
Ancient Palpatine and the other Palpatine was a clone.
Right before The Rise of Skywalker came out, there was this wild theory going around the internet that the original Emperor that Darth Vader killed on the Death Star was actually just a clone of the real Emperor Palpatine, and that the real Emperor, he was this ancient, decrepit thing that never left the bowels of his dark planet, and he sent out mind-controlled clones to do his bidding for thousands of years. I kinda liked that idea, and if that had happened, that would have been pretty cool. But it still would have just been Palpatine.
Duh. But if Palpatine was gonna be the villain, then they should have teased him at the end of the second movie. Like, they should have shown him laughing in the shadows, so you know that he'd be coming up next in the third movie.
Nah, that would have been unnecessary. I mean, that's not how Star Wars movies work. That's how Marvel movies work. Star Wars never does that. They never tease the next thing. I mean, A New Hope, it doesn't end with the Emperor on his throne vowing to strike back. That comes in the next movie. The Empire Strikes Back, it doesn't end here with the rebels receiving the bad news that the Empire is building a second Death Star. The Phantom Menace doesn't end with Count Dooku laughing from the shadows and declaring that he's going to create a separatist movement because he's Darth Tyrannus. Attack of the Clones, it doesn't end with Anakin and Padme's wedding being interrupted by some new villain named General Grievous. Star Wars movies, they always end on a hopeful note. They don't end with a sinister tease. And this is a bigger issue than just the lack of a mid-credit stinger. It's about how the movies themselves are constructed, and always have been. Just like the Jedi themselves, the Star Wars movies have a laser focus on the present. Although part of a larger story, they are also supposed to be relatively self-contained. They are episodic, if you will, which is probably why they're referred to as episodes. I mean, that was George Lucas's original intention when he first started this. He wanted a whole bunch of separate movies where Luke Skywalker was like Flash Gordon.
Luke Skywalker fights the Star War. Luke Skywalker and the Princess of Alderaan. Luke Skywalker and the Emperor of Evil.
He eventually decided on a larger narrative, but each movie still kept its serial quality. And you know, you could argue that this is the best way of doing things. Star Wars movies, they remind me of the first fictional world that I ever fell in love with as a kid. Narnia. You've read the Chronicles of Narnia, right? If not, I'd like to have a word with your parents. Each of the 7 books is part of a larger story, but C.S. Lewis didn't have it all mapped out when he wrote the first one. Each time he sat down to write a Narnia book, he'd skip over to some new time, introduce some totally new elements, come up with a singular story that operates on its own. He would just play jazz. It all ties together into this one fantastic mythos, but each book is totally unique. A lot of people complain about consistency and they want everything to be mapped out beforehand. But if you ask me, that can be the enemy of imagination. If you worry too much about the long game, you end up with these movies like the 6th Harry Potter and the 3rd Hunger Games movie and the 5th season of Game of Thrones, where the narrative is just kind of buying time and treading water and moving characters from A to B. I mean, how many times have you said to yourself, dude, I want to go back and watch Mockingjay Part 1? Probably not many. Do you feel like going back and watching just the 5th season of Game of Thrones? You probably don't. I mean, what happened in the 5th season even? Game of Thrones and Harry Potter. Those are 2 series in particular that were madly popular in their time, but now people have kind of cooled on both of them. They probably should have been more episodic. They both kept the audience guessing and guessing what the endgame was going to be, and they were great at stoking that anticipation along the way.
Who will sit on the Iron Throne in the end? What is the dark secret that connects Harry Potter to the evil Lord Voldemort?
But once you got to the fireworks factory at the end and the fireworks went off, then you were just there and it was over. You didn't really feel like going back to the beginning and going on that whole journey again, because the whole point of the journey was just the ending, which wasn't even that good. I mean, have you ever gone back and tried to reread A Feast for Crows? Can anyone remember what A Feast for Crows was even about? But Narnia? Man, every book is totally distinct and special. The Voyage of the Dawn Treader is my favorite. It's the one about the mystical journey to the end of the world. A Horse and His Boy is the one about the horse and his boy and how living in the desert sucks. You don't get any Narnia book mixed up with the others. Star Wars is a lot like that. Yes, The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker are 2 very different movies. They're distinct enough that people generally have a strong favorite between them, just as they might have a strong favorite between Attack of the Clones and The Phantom Menace, or between Return of the Jedi and The Empire Strikes Back. That's a good thing. I mean, you don't ever have that feeling in your brain of like, what was that one where they were fighting in the Coliseum? What movie was that? Or, they all just kind of run together. See, no, that never happens. You know that the Coliseum is from Attack of the Clones. You might hate Attack of the Clones, but it's memorable. I say, screw consistency. Embrace the episodic. Go back and read you some Narnia. And hey, that's another reason why I like the second Wonder Woman movie so much. You see, even though there's going to be 3 Wonder Woman movies at minimum, it's not like they're going to really form a coherent trilogy. I mean, there's no overarching thing that... Oh my god, I'm rambling. Get back on the fucking point, asshole.
Palpatine.
I don't know. Maybe I'm biased. I just really love ol'Palpy. Back in the day when George Lucas was trying to come up with this supremely evil guy who ran the whole galaxy, the guy who was Darth Vader's boss, he could have made him like Sauron, made him just some dark, gargantuan thing with a booming voice. Instead, when he finally appears, he's this creepy, nasty, scabby old freak of a man. And he's a total dick with a weird voice. And he gets off on making fun of the good guys like a smug asshole. I just love that. He's just a great villain. He's just great, and I want more. And by having Palpatine come back in this third trilogy, it gives him these 3 distinct stages. He starts off as a politician, and then he becomes a tyrant, and then finally, this dark satanic terrorist striking back at the world that rejected him. You know, villains tend to do that in real life. They overstay their welcome and crawl back to power after they're defeated the first time. I mean, Napoleon did it. Hitler did it. In 1923, Hitler was arrested and sent to prison in Germany, and the country said, well, that's the last we're ever going to hear about that guy. But then he came back, bigger and badder than ever before. Hell, this asshole's trying to come back from the dead, and we in America really hope that he does not succeed. I mean, I'm sorry, this is not the ending of such a great villain. This is a bit of palace intrigue that sets him back a few decades. With all of Palpatine's brilliance, with all of his backups and contingencies, it's insulting to think that he didn't know that something like this might happen, and that he wouldn't have a backup plan for it. Give Palpatine some credit for thinking ahead. And I'm sorry, I know you loved it as a kid, but the Battle of Endor was not the massive, end-all, be-all, climactic, apocalyptic battle between light and dark that was supposed to solve everything. This is that battle. This right here. Oh yeah.
Palpatine comes out of the closet.
Okay, think about this. J.J. Abrams, he saw the original trilogy when he was young, just like us. And it's hard to remember now, but back then, we had no idea who the Emperor was or how he came to power. When we were kids, we imagined that he was a Dark Lord from some shadow planet who just kind of marched in with his terrifying armies and took over everything by force. George Lucas, he made comments likening him to some kind of shaman or grand wizard of the dark side. Maybe he was a 1,000-year-old demon or something, we didn't know. Before 1999, we had no idea who this guy actually was. Then, in 1999, the prequels totally subverted all of our expectations, and they showed that he started off as just this polite, perfumed politician from a lovely planet who rose to power through trickery and subterfuge. He was in plain sight all along, and no one knew who he was. Rian Johnson will never subvert an expectation to that level that George Lucas did when he made Palpatine this guy. It was a complete 180 to what we expected. So this, Palpatine on Exegol, all of this, I think of this as J.J. Abrams paying homage to our childhood imaginings. It's fulfilling that promise that we had in our minds. It's only in this final movie that Palpatine really becomes his purest self. He never really got to do that in the original trilogy. He'd only recently dissolved the Senate. He still had to keep the Death Star a secret because he thought it would turn the Senate against him. He may have been in charge of the Empire, but he was not all powerful. He couldn't even reveal himself as a Sith, because that might have turned people against him. But this is Palpatine fully formed and living his truth. He finally gets to stand up and say, hey, I'm a Sith Lord from a Sith planet with my Sith troopers and my Sith fleet, and we're going to take over the whole galaxy in the name of the Sith. No more pretending to be a politician, I'm going to let my freak flag fly. No more pretending that I'm just some elected leader running a bureaucracy who's trying to bring order to the galaxy. This is me going full Sith, baby. He finally gets to taste it. He finally gets that sense of ultimate power for one glorious shining moment before his granddaughter fries his head with his own lightning. But for that one moment, Palpatine is who he truly is. He is Palpatine incarnate. He is Palpatine qua Palpatine, or whatever you want to say. How could you ever be against that? You fool!
Duh, but how did he return? I mean, they never explained that.
Have you angry fanboys ever heard of Force ghosts? I mean, we have this fictional world where the Jedi can preserve their spirits after death and come back as ghosts, but they mostly just offer advice to the living because, of course, a Jedi would never think of possessing someone else. Jedi are against possession, they've moved past all that. And later we learned that this is a specific skill that has to be mastered. Qui-Gon Jinn figured out how to do it, and apparently Palpatine did as well. Like a lot of villains, he wants immortality and he can't accept the reality of his own death. So he comes back as a Force ghost, and he has clones, so he puts his ghost inside of a clone, but it's kind of shitty, so he also wants to put his ghost inside of a hot young person. I mean, come on, this is literally 1 + 1 = 2 here, people. Do I have to draw you a frickin' map? I mean, if you really need some kind of scene on Exegol where his servants are preparing this, like, wretched clone body, and one of them says,
"The clone body is ready for the Emperor's dark spirit to inhabit it."
if you really need to see that to understand it, just fill in the fucking blanks, dude.
But what about Palpatine's son? I mean, that was weird.
You know, when I first saw The Rise of Skywalker, I agreed with that. The idea of Palpatine just having some son that was never heard about, I thought, that's kind of weird. That's kind of random that he just had this unknown kid out there somewhere. And then they say that his kid was actually a clone, and in The Mandalorian we start to see where this clone might have come from. Honestly, it was a bit weird at first. But then I realized something. Palpatine having this nice, normal son, it's another thing that connects him to Hitler, to the Nazis. Apparently this has been mostly verified by history, but when Adolf Hitler was a young German soldier, he had a fling with this random French woman that he met, and he ended up having this son out there named Jean-Marie Lauré. Perfectly normal guy, never did anything evil, had a bunch of kids, he just happened to be Hitler's son. And wait a minute. Hitler's biological heir was named Jean-Marie Lauré? Lauré?
Ray?
My God, it all fits. It all makes sense. J.J. Abrams, you're a genius. Like, I don't even like a lot of the stuff that you made, but you get a lifetime pass from me for these Star Wars movies. I don't really like your Star Trek movies all that much. I still think Super 8 is super boring, and I'm probably never going to see that stuff you did at the beginning of your career. Gone Fishing, Regarding Henry, Forever Young. What the hell? But man, The Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker, J.J. Abrams, those are your masterpieces, dude. Thank you for them. And thank you for bringing back Palpatine. I am so glad that we got to see him one last time. We can close the book on good old Palpy and move on to whatever's happening in the future. Chances are the next big bad is going to be Grand Admiral Thrawn. If you've ever seen Star Wars Rebels, then you know what an incredible genius villain he is. And if you haven't seen Star Wars Rebels, good God, go watch Star Wars Rebels. It's incredible. It might be the best story in all of Star Wars. What are you waiting for? It even has a little Palpatine in it, kind of near the end. Little more Palpatine? A little more Palpatine there for you? Yeah, you want that. You want some more Palpatine, don't you? Ah, I know I do. I can't help it, guys. I love Palpatine.
I am the Senate.
The Jedi are taking over!